Okay, so I'm going to do another little video here about the being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So here you see, is that God? Is that God appearing as Metatron? No, actually, I think it's angels, cherub. So, okay, so this is the common image that people see when they think of Adam and Eve being kicked out of the garden. So the reason that there's a few things wrong with this, if you read the Bible itself, the verse. Several things right with it, a few things wrong with it. One thing is there's supposed to be a sword. The sword is supposed to be pointing in all directions. And another thing is the Hebrew word for the creatures that were placed where they were put out of the Garden of Eden. I looked it up with the cherub, the Hebrew word, and it says imaginary creatures. So, well, it could be, in some verses it says that cherubs are a type of angel, and in this particular verse it says imaginary creatures. Cherub is another word for imaginary creatures. According to the Strong's Concordance, which I just looked up from my interlinear Bible with English and Hebrew was the original language that the Bible was written in, through the Old Testament was written in. So it says here, cherub of uncertainty, a cherub or imaginary figure. So imaginary figure, that's important for this particular context. So I was like thinking of where the Garden of Eden is at and what did the Bible say, because like the flood of Noah happened, it doesn't say what happened in the Garden of Eden. So how would we know where it was? If we knew where it was, we might know that it actually existed, right? It could be a fairy tale and mythology, right, for all we know. Except for if those of us like me who've had experiences with answered prayer and God's hand in their life, which God will, of course, work in your life if you let Him. You just have to have a relationship with Him, and you need that through Christ. So I'm nobody special. I am just telling you my experience. So, okay, so on this topic, so I'm like thinking, like, it just interests me, like, okay, the flood of Noah happened, and then you just kind of assume that, it was wiped out and it was never there again. So, like, buried under sediment or whatever, like a lot of things were after the flood, right? Like, we see very few, if any, evidence of civilization before the flood, other than the ark, which we have an artifact that fits the location where it landed and the sizes, and it's been somewhat excavated. There's a grave site near there with a little rainbow over this tombstone. All this evidence, like, it is believed that's the grave site of Noah and his wife, and that's Noah's Ark. So before the flood, there's a lot of science in the Bible about what the earth was like before the flood. And this story is actually, it's like data doesn't lie, right? And God made all of creation, and science is the study of nature, natural science. That's why it's called natural sciences. You have philosophy, which is studying like beliefs, and you have psychology, which is studying your mind, will, emotions, and such. But science, natural sciences, studies creation. And where did creation come from? Well, God made it, so He created the code for creation, for our DNA and all of that. So anyway, so this is an example of the data being misinterpreted. And I'm not trying to tear the Bible apart, I'm trying to fix errors in the story. And the basic idea in this photo is like, this painting is like, right, because there were imaginary figures placed and a flaming sword pointing in all directions. So that's what it says. We'll go to the verse and look at it again. I like to look at the Bible Hub because you get I probably just need an account here because I use this all the time. So you get like the verse, and then you get several different translations of the Bible. Which some translations are garbage, and that's why I like to go back to the original text, and then translate it directly from the original word to whatever my language is that I'm using, or just learn what the original word meant in the original text. So we're gonna go to the King James Bible here. So it says, so he drove out the mankind in this context, and he placed to the east of the garden cherubs, the east of Eden, cherubs and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. Cherubim. It could say cherubim in this. Some translations say creatures, and a lot of them say cherubim. This way, cherubim, cherubs, winged creatures. Well, if you know what a cherub is supposed to look like, then it's winged creatures, right? And they cast out Adam and placed before paradise pleasure cherubs. That's a weird translation. So literal translation is interesting. So indeed he cast out man, which in this case mankind, so Adam and Eve, and caused a cherub to dwell at the east of the garden with the sword of flame whirling around to guard the way of the tree of life. Okay, so several different ways to say the same thing. So they were put out towards the east, and on this side, which is direction of the sunrise, which I'm sure there's a meaning to that, like if they're put out towards the direction of the sunrise, maybe that's means it's a new day starting for this particular phase of humanity or whatever. All right, so I was curious about I didn't get all my photos here. I was curious about this and like where would where would the Garden of Eden be, and where are these cherubs, and where is the flaming sword? Like the Bible doesn't say that is gone at the flood of Noah. It just says it was there before. It doesn't say the flood destroyed it or anything. So it would have still had to have a location. And people are thinking, well, it speaks of this river, and then we have this river in the Middle East. But the fact of the matter is, the word river that we have translated for Euphrates or whatever could have just meant river, and it doesn't mean a particular river. So before the flood, Euphrates might have just been the word for river. So, northern lights from space. Okay, now gonna need this image here. Okay, so to learn more about the northern lights, because I'm like, maybe for some reason I just made the connection northern lights, right? So I'm like, maybe it's the northern lights. Well, I just looked it up. I maybe divinely inspired, something just kind of like struck me. Like, I don't know why I thought of taking this image, not this image, this image. I don't know why the flaming sword just kind of like, somewhere I just thought of like the northern lights, right? And so I'm like, So I looked up at the northern lights, and I'm like, well, hey, this could absolutely look like a flaming sword shining in all directions. Because it kind of is. And it could also form, since it's always moving and making noise, imaginary creatures. In fact, that kind of looks like it could even be an angel right there. The wings and stuff. And as the northern lights are a phenomenon caused by the sun shooting like energizing particles in the atmosphere, then it would make sense that it would be to the east before the flood. Now, as we see, it's all around the globe, right? So, for me, this has to be the Northern Lights, and somewhere here, Norway or Finland would have been where the Garden of Eden would have been, if not the whole area, because before the flood, with the ring around the earth, the canopy or firmament or vault, which think of it like a rainbow, right? A rainbow, you only see half of it. If you could see the whole rainbow, it would be a circle around where you stand, where it's at, right? You only see half of it. So the same way, before the flood of Noah, they would only have seen half of the ring around the earth. So the whole earth was warmer, and we knew this from fossil records, and it had more oxygen, so more pressure. Animals could grow bigger. The whole planet would have had more of a moderate climate, and the Northern Lights, would have been called something else. Flaming sword, for example. And I think before the flood, people didn't really question whether or not there was a God or not, because they could go to someone who either had first or second-hand knowledge of talking to him in person after creation, like Adam, Cain, Abel was killed, but Seth, for example. So I was kind of like curious, trying to figure out what the angels might be. So I kind of looked to other mythology, because a lot of times mythology is used to explain a truth. So it might not be completely accurate or correct, but there might be the truth in there somewhere. So some cultures think that it's a dark omen, it's something to be afraid of. So before the flood, after Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, it was something to be afraid of, because God didn't want them to go to the tree of life and eat and live forever in this fallen state. It's not that he didn't want us to live forever, because that was the original plan. But after we broke our relationship with him, we lost our connection to the main source. It would keep us pure, renewed, healthy for an indefinite amount of time. Like, I think Christ himself would not have died of natural causes. He would only have died if he was put to death like he was crucified. So, because he had a direct connection to God, because he was God in flesh, right? So, and that's how he was able to rewrite the code and heal people and raise the dead. Okay, so anyway, some cultures, there's always a mystical aspect given to the Northern Lights, which, sorry, it's science, there isn't, people think that's like even a gateway to the afterlife, but it's just charged particles. And before the flood of Noah, when the atmosphere was thicker and more pressure, these energized particles may have just made it stronger. It might have just been people were just afraid of it, or it might have been there was a charge that if people touched it, would have like fried them or whatever. We don't know, because the atmosphere is not like it was. But it looks to me fairly obvious that the Northern Lights are the sword that turns in all directions, and may also be what appeared as the winged creatures to the east. So it'd be worth checking out if there's more movement on the east side of the Northern Lights as the rest of the ring of it. Anyway, so something to think about, and if that is the in fact the sword, flaming sword pointing all direction, if that is indeed where Eden was and is possibly even today buried under the sediment, and we could even maybe find a fossil of the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Maybe it would be fossilized by now, so it might not be viable fruit anymore. And I don't think that God made those particular trees capable of reproducing. I don't know. But those trees were particularly a special kind of tree for a special purpose. That whatever the original plan was that God had with them, we screwed up. So we never got to really experience that. But now we have a different way to enter eternity with God, and that's through Christ. Because even though he didn't intend for us to screw things up, he knew that we might. But sometimes the risk is worth the reward, you know? Like, you can't be afraid to, like, say, have a child because anything could go wrong, you know? And if you have a child, there's so much joy and love there, you know? Sometimes it's worth the risk. So God felt that creating us was worth the risk, and then we screwed up horribly, and he, like, regretted making us and was going to destroy everything with the flood, but Noah caught a break for all of us, and that's how we're here today. So, okay, so, and then I'm going to do another video about the, how Earth would survive the sun going red giant.